I do a lot of watching of videos. I love watching videos. There's a wealth of information out there on techniques and whatnot. But one of the problems that I have with watching a video is that the demonstrator, he starts off with this big chunk of wood, and then a miracle happens, and all of a sudden he's ready to turn. How many of you have turned? I have never turned green wood. I've always went out and bought, like dried wood. How many have never turned green wood? How many have never turned green wood from a freshly cut? Okay, in other words, still has the bark on it, and just basically slabbed it out of a tree. How many have never done that? Okay? All right, we're going to talk about that because that's the starting point. Okay? So, with that said, bark off, and you can take it off lots of different ways. I typically use a hammer and a chisel. Or you can let a big chunk of bark fly off and hit you in the face. The choice is yours. It really doesn't matter. You can do it on a lathe if you want, but your chances of that bark falling off are pretty doggone good. So I normally take the bark off before I start anything. The second thing I do is I trim the ends. Okay, you want to make sure that you cut until you don't see any check marks. And then it's a good idea to cut even more because they're still deeper. Okay? So start off with a decent piece of wood to begin with. We can start to do something with it. So that's what I'm going to show you. Now, I start off between centers. And the center that I use, is this showing up here? Okay. The centers that I use are these Storby, they're like what Mike was showing the last time. The reason that I use them, you can use a 2-jaw or a 4-jaw, a 4-prong center. Those will work fine. These are a little safer, but I use them because there's a spring on the points. And I'll show you where that comes into play. From point to point to give me a starting point. So let's put that in a lathe, right there. And let's see what happens.
Steve, have you done anything to find the centers, or are you just sticking it in there?
Well, I do have a center finder, but you kind of have to have something that's either square or rectangular or round to begin with. If you got something that's weird shape, the center finder doesn't do much good. And even if you could find the exact center, geometrical center of this, you don't know anything about this wood. There may be voids in it. There may be, and we'll try it again. And it's still a little bit low. So let's go the other way. That's not too bad. Yeah. All right. You don't see the lathe walking across the room. I'm up to 800, 900. I'm up to 1,000. That's probably good enough. Okay? So now it's balanced, and quite frankly, when you start across the grain, I never want to cut into the grain. And what I mean by that is, if I come like this, I'm cutting right into the end grain. That would be one of the toughest things in the world to do. It's hard on you, it's hard on the tools, it's hard on the lathe, and it makes sawdust. It's just not a good thing to do. If the grain is going like this, you want to go into it this way. You're cutting into the grain, okay, into the side grain. And it's real simple. that way. If you look, I got chips. Whoop. Oh, I got a microphone that doesn't work. Come in this way and make a small concave surface. Lots of different ways to do that. You can turn the tool rest, you can come in with a gouge. If this was round, I'd be able to move the tool rest up a little bit, but I'm just trying to take a parting tool. And I'm not going to go all the way because I can't get the tool rest up. A concave surface. And slightly concave. We're not trying to make a bowl here. Slightly concave, like maybe a 1/16 of an inch at most. And the reason for that is because I'm going to use a faceplate on this. My objective is to get something that looks like simply screwed a faceplate onto it. Let's talk about screws for a second. Just use chucks. Do not try hollow forms of any kind of distance, any kind of length with a chuck. Don't ask me how I know that. Not a good plan. Start with a faceplate. And you know, I see a lot of videos where they're gluing stuff up and they're using CA glue and all that. You don't need to do all that. You can just glue it right into the wood or screw it right into the wood. And make sure you use a decent size wood screw. Something like a 10 or a 12. I use stainless steel simply because I think it's a little bit. Are you all with me on how we got to this point? Okay. Pages. And these are just kind of do's and don'ts and things that I've come across from trial and error, from watching other people's videos, and from a lot of people out in the audience that that have helped me along the way. So one of the things when you mount a faceplate, ideally your faceplate will be at least 40% of the diameter of the wood that you're working on. If you go too much less than that, you run the risk of the wood just being overpowering to the faceplate. Hollowing perspective. The system that I'm going to show you today will handle about 10 to 12 inches in depth. If you want to go more than that, you're going to have to do it. You're going to need a bigger system, right? It's just not going to handle. There's going to be way too much vibration. If you're doing a Christmas ornament, you don't need the system that we're going to be showing you today. There's lots of different options. Okay, so just have realistic expectations about what the capability is of the tool that you're using or the system that you're using and the depth of your hollow form. Last but not least, that the blank that I was starting off with was relatively small. You want as much mass on the back end as you can possibly get. And then you don't want to come down to a real small diameter. It's kind of like making a finial. Have you guys made finials before? I mean, you don't get a tool in there all the way down in that narrow of a hole and hollow something out. If you had to hollow it out, you'd probably have to hollow it out from this side and then glue a blank or something into it. But hollowing it out from this side isn't gonna work, or at least not with the tools that I've got. Let's talk about the differences. If I hold them up like that, can you see where this is coming out, where this is more straight? In essence, it's going to be a little tough. If you open that up just a little bit, now your tool can come in here and get to that angle very nicely. It's just a subtle change, but it makes a big difference when you're turning it, when you're trying to hollow it out. So think about how your shape is going to end up. Understand how to do silver soldering. How do I make a tool that I can do some hollowing with and not go out and spend $200, $300, $400 on a system? And you say, well, it's real easy. You just go get some high-speed steel, or you go down to Home Depot and you get yourself a 1/4 inch bar, and you solder it together. Weld it together, whatever. And I tried this, and it works. If you're going to have a small little Christmas ornament or something, it works great. So I went one way and I got their termite tool. This works great. Nice ring tool, okay? So it takes a little bit of time to get used to it, but this will hollow out as well. But again, are tied up in all these other tools, other than the one that Greg made for me. That was free, kind of free. Okay, so I guess it all depends on your viewpoint, but for me, I wanted something that was safe, something that I was going to feel comfortable with, and that's what this one does. Oh, wait a minute. And I'm kind of a firm believer of using this.
Yeah, someplace they mentioned here, just for you. Yeah, that's what it was.
I call it a lesson or no.
Take,
Hold it underneath the other camera.
Use the other one.
There you go.
they make a carbide tool as well, okay? There's a little bit of a learning curve on this. This one is pretty straightforward. Basically what you're doing is scraping, okay? And you're trying to get as much wood out as you can and follow the outside. As far as the cutters, Greg actually put me onto this. You can get high-speed steel cutters, just a square bar stock, at Production Tool down on, I think it's Grand River, in Novi. This costs something like, I don't know, if you buy a half a dozen of them, I think they cost about 75 cents a piece. And if you cut them in half, you get 2. So for about 40 cents, you get 2 cutters ready to go. Now you go out and buy them to be right at or possibly a little bit above the center line, preferably right at the center line, never below the center line. And the neat thing about this system is that Jameson also sells a tool rest, and that tool rest is adjustable. So when you're trying to get right to the center, it's very easy just to crank on this nut just a little bit, one way or the other. That's not necessarily that important here, but when you're trying to take that little nub off at the end, it's really important. You need to be dead nuts right on, okay? Let's see. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to pull out this section right in here. And I want to get it all the way down to the point where I can make that wall nice and smooth. And once I've done that, and I'm real happy with what I've done here, then and only then do I start the whole process again. Okay? That's the idea. Now, why do you what happens is once you hollow this out, it starts to warp on you. Maybe not a lot, or maybe a lot. Okay? I guarantee you that it's going to want to adjust the cutter maybe about like that, so I can get in there and start working on it. And then I want to adjust the laser so that it is some distance from that point. Now, what's important when you're adjusting the laser is if you look at this line, you want this line to run pretty much parallel to the side. You want this line to run perpendicular to the side of your vessel. If you don't, as you get further down in here, your laser setting is going to be all off. So right now, I'm looking at roughly, I don't want this thing twisting on me, okay? And I can move this whole thing around very easily. It's always in a constant plane. So let's cut. It's just that simple. So I'm in about an inch or so, and I'm going to want to start again with the roller. So right here, I'm right off, you see where the laser is coming off the end? And you see the laser right at the edge of the, that's where you want to be. I gotta go back here and get a little bit more room to get some breathing room in there. The tool marks at this point. And you're gonna wanna blow out the shavings frequently because they're gonna build up quite a bit. So I'm going to do a little bit more. It's the same process. Notice the tool rest isn't right up against the wood. I don't need that right now. I've got plenty of capabilities right where it's at. Now at some point, for sure with the other design, I would have run out of room. And if you notice right here, the bar is starting to hit the opening. I can still move it quite a ways. But at some point, that isn't going to work. Take this cutter out. Take this swivel arm out. And put a swivel arm in that looks like this. important on this vessel, but if I was doing something like this, I'd have a real hard time getting up in through here with the other swivel that I have. So now I've got the ability to come in and hollow out a whole lot deeper in the angle here. So I want that laser to be right about there. And it works just that easy. What happens is it builds up a lot of heat on the inside, and the vessel will pretty much crash, guarantee if you get too much heat. There's hardly any pressure on it. Just as easy as can be. All right. It's exactly the same as what I've been showing you. So I'm not going to waste your time or bore you with going any deeper, but it's basically the exact same thing. The only part that comes into play that's a little tough is when you get to the very end and you're trying to, just like on a bowl, when you're trying to get rid of that little nub in the middle, it's a little tougher on a hollow form. How do you do that? Well, ideally, this point will be right on center. And if it is, it'll come off pretty easily. If it's not on center, you'll either end up with an indentation or you'll end up with a point, okay, depending upon whether it's high or low. So that's one way. Another way, and he's got, I don't know, a couple hundred videos out there on how to do stuff. He's kind of laid up right now. He's had I think a brain tumor. So he's a little bit under the weather right now, but one of the things he does, other than the videos, is he sells carbide tools. Now, I'm not a big fan of carbide, cutters. The small ones, like what we're using here, they're great. But, the easy wood tools, they're fine. I'm just not a big fan of them. To me, they're very expensive for what you get. But, and actually, lots of people sell them. Sorby, if you, like a teardrop, you're going to get something like that. You can buy those all day long down at Rockler. There's nothing that says that you can't put that on here. Now, I would not recommend trying to hollow it out with a cutter that big, because there's too much force on the wood for, you're causing yourself nothing but grief. Use the small cutter to hollow it out, but to smooth it out, the bigger the cutter, use it like you would a bowl scraper to smooth out the tool marks. And it works great. It also takes care of that nub really nice. Once you get this kind of a system, you can add to it. I haven't experimented with this yet, but I'm in the process of looking into it, if you will. I'm looking at putting a flap sander on here. You know what I mean when I say a flap sander? Because there's nothing worse than sticking your hand in through a small hole with this thing turning at some ungodly speed with sandpaper on there. You kind of feel like you're going to end up going around in circles with it or needing a Band-Aid. Okay, so if I can make this work with a flap sander and sand the inside, I can sand it all the way down to the bottom. So it's going to be a little bit